The Razor Shell Knit Lace Shawl Pattern is knit from the bottom up. The first rows are daunting, but with the decreased rows, they just get faster and faster. The garter stitch ruffle has a beautiful flounce to it, and the vertical lines of the lace pattern burst into a fan with the cleverly placed decreases in pattern. The bamboo shines like silk and drapes so beautifully. Wear it to your fanciest of holiday parties. You're going to need one ball of Be So Fine yarn. Here it is shown in colorway $1 Million Red. You'll also need a US 6 or 4 millimeter set of knitting needles, preferably 24 inches or longer of a circular style. You'll need a yarn needle, scissors, and optional is stitch markers. Hi, I'm Kristin Omdahl. Today I want to show you how to make this absolutely gorgeous knit lace shawl. It's called the Razor Shell, and it is absolutely inspired by a seashell that I found at the beach. In this video, I'm going to show you how to read the line-by-line instructions, how to read the chart, and we're going to follow along with the beautiful finished shawl as we go so you can see exactly what yours is supposed to look like along the way. Let's get started. In the beginning of the pattern, for the ruffle, you want to have twice as many stitches as you are actually going to need to begin the project. And that's because doing double the number of stitches and then decreasing after the ruffle is what gives you this volume and that flounce. So for this particular pattern, in this gauge, we're going to cast on 630 stitches. And I know that sounds scary, but trust me, it goes really pretty quickly because you're only doing 12 rows of simple garter stitch while you're doing that large number of stitches. Then you're going to decrease in each stitch across so that you go from 630 all the way down to 315. For the rest of the shawl, we have an 8-stitch selvage edge, which means the first and last 8 stitches of each row of the shawl are just to knit, and it gives you this beautiful border along the sides, which ends up being the top edge of the shawl. And so after the ruffle, all you're doing besides that one little selvage edge at the beginning and end of each row is you are working in this repeated lace pattern 13 times. And if you notice, the shawl is pretty much a half circle or a shell shape. So we're repeating the pattern repeat 13 times. Each one of these is one of the repeats. And so we start with this widest portion of the stitch pattern here. It starts with 23 stitches per repeat. And as we work in the pattern, we decrease up this center spine actually. We've got yarn overs and a decrease in here. And we do that repeatedly. Follow it, and you can follow the line-by-line instructions or the chart, and we'll talk about that in a minute, until you get all the way up to the top edge here. And then when those repeats end, they come down to 1 stitch each. So because we did 13 repeats, you'll then have 13 stitches in between your two 8-stitch selvage edges. And then you're going to work back and forth on those 8 stitches, knitting 2 together on this side of the edge so that you're eating away at those stitches and working sideways, joining perpendicularly to those stitches from the lace pattern. And you may have already understood that if you've looked at the pattern, but sometimes I think it helps people to see a visual of what you're doing. And anyway, so going back to this, once you go across the entire number of those stitches from those wedges, you'll then do a 3-needle bind off or sew the first 8 stitches to the last 8 stitches of the row together. And then you have this seamless, beautiful shawl where you can't see where that selvage edge begins and ends from the right and left side of the shawl. And the real beauty of working a bottom-up shawl is that even though it feels like a ton of work in the beginning when you're doing this ruffle, as you're decreasing down, your rows get progressively shorter and faster as you go, which really has some like instant gratification style feeling as you're getting up towards the end. So now what I wanted to show you is how to read the chart. It's very simple. We have a key, we have boxes, and we have numbers along the side. And I'm going to show you a close-up of this so you can see what I'm talking about. First of all, in the key, it gives you the definition of each of the symbols. And so a blank square is just to knit. A little circle in the square is the yarn over. And then we have our dashed lines, which if it's right leaning, it's a knit two together. If it's left leaning, it's a slip slip knit. Then we have something that looks kind of like an M, and that's our double decrease, and it's called a slip two, knit one, pass two slip stitches over. And then our final one at the bottom here is kind of like that M, but it has a 5 in the middle, and that's because it is a stronger decrease. It is a knit 5 together. If you need any help with these stitches, I do have videos and glossary definitions that give you step-by-step wording on how to do these on my website on a page called How to Knit, and I'll put a link to that in the video description. Okay, moving on to the actual chart. On this particular chart, we're only showing every other row. The reason being is that every even row in this entire project is just to knit across. So it was kind of redundant to show a row of just knit stitches every other row. So you'll notice that we only have numbers on the right side of the chart. And that's because we're only showing the odd numbered rows. You'll notice that the first row has 4 numbers next to it. That's because you're going to repeat this row for rows 1, 3, 5, and 7. Row 9 has its own unique pattern, and that's because on row 9 of the pattern, we only do that set of instructions on that row. This chart reflects everything you're repeating for the 13 repeats inside the 8-stitch selvage edge. So row 1 would begin with knit 8. Then the sections that you're going to repeat 13 times are what you see on this chart. It's a knit 1, yarn over, knit 9, S2KP, which means slip 2, knit 1, pass slip stitch over, knit 9, yarn over, knit 1. Now, you can do this with or without stitch markers. If you're going to place stitch markers, you're going to want to place them after the first knit 8, and then after every time you do this section. Sometimes I get asked questions about how you would modify this shawl. Let's say you wanted it to be shorter, or let's say you would want it to be longer. It's really simple to modify this shawl because on the rows that you repeat the stitch pattern, for example on rows 1, 3, 5, and 7, you could just repeat it twice instead of the 4 times, or you could do it 6 times instead of 4 times. If you wanted to make this a shorter shawl, everywhere that it has the stitch pattern repeated for 4 rows, you would do it for 2 rows instead, or 3, whatever. And if you wanted to make this a much longer shawl, you could increase by 1 row in each one of those repeating sections. The only thing that I would caution you is on the row, like row 9, 19, 29, and 39, those are rows where you're affecting the stitch count. Make sure you don't repeat those because those will really severely alter your stitch count. Every time you order a hank of Be So Fine yarn, it comes hand wound into a center pull ball, and it comes with a pod of Wrapture all natural delicate wash. This is wonderful for blocking your shawl, and if you have any questions about how to block this shawl, please refer to the link in the video description where I've done several tutorials on how to block. Another question that comes my way pretty often is how often do you block? And when you think of blocking as how you launder something, I think it's a little easier to understand. What you'll want to do is soak this tiny little pod in, open it up, place it in a large bowl or a sink with lukewarm water. You're going to soak this, express the water out, lay it flat to dry, pin it to the final shape if it needs it, and let it dry. And that would be not only when you're blocking it, but when you're laundering it as well. Again, I'll put those links in the video description if you'd like to watch some videos. On blocking. The pattern, the chart, and the yarn are available on my website, and those links will also be available in the video description below. Please subscribe to my channel for more videos.